A huge part of my everyday life, and perhaps one of my favorite parts, is my nighttime routine. After a long day of chemistry experiments, teaching, working out, or hanging with my friends and fam, I get a moment to myself to change into my pajamas and climb into my warm and toasty bed, perhaps maybe put my icy cold feet on my husband, and then slip into 8 gorgeous hours of uninterrupted sleep. Real talk, I love sleeping, and I like to think that I'm really good at it too. When my head hits the pillow and it's time to catch some Z's, I'm out. But a lot of people really struggle with sleeping. George Clooney and Rihanna have been open about how hard it is for them to unwind and doze off at the end of the day. Jennifer Aniston has been quoted as saying that when she wakes up in the middle of the night, she has a committee in her head that won't shut up. What about you? Can you relate to any of this?
I definitely have trouble falling asleep, and then I wake up at 7 a.m. whether I want to or not.
I love sleeping.
I have insomnia. I have to take a pill or I'll be up all night.
It's easy for me to fall asleep. Getting good sleep is a little harder, especially when I'm stressed. I'll just jolt awake.
My mind starts thinking about all kinds of stuff.
Everybody experiences sleep differently, and that's what makes it so mysterious and unknown. Isn't it wild that every day we close our eyes, lose consciousness, dream, and then we wake up feeling recharged and full of energy? Where do we go mentally? And what is happening to us biologically? From the Stowers Institute for Medical Research and KCUR studios in Kansas City, this is Seeking a Scientist, a podcast where science fiction meets reality. I'm Dr. Kate Bieberdorf, aka Kate the Chemist, and in this episode, we're exploring some of the mysteries of sleep. What even is it? And what happens when we don't get it?
Whatever you do, don't fall asleep.
First of all, I know you're probably thinking, an entire episode on sleep? Won't that be boring? Quite the opposite, actually. I don't want to give it all away, but if you stick with me until the end of the episode, I can promise you that you'll learn how vulnerable different animals are in their sleep, and you'll hear a dreaming theory that could explain why some people believe they were abducted by aliens overnight.
Is this why we came out here, Mulder? To look for UFOs?
And as a special treat, we'll answer some of your questions that we couldn't get to last month. Y'all were really curious about sleep. To break it all down for us, I want you to meet one of the top sleep researchers, Giorgio Gilestro.
Hi, my name is Giorgio Gilestro. I'm a professor in systems neurobiology at Imperial College London, and my main scientific interest is sleep.
I've got a bunch of questions, and I think what you do is so fascinating. What intrigues you about sleep?
I would say for me it was really a bit of an epiphany when I realized at the end of my PhD that really we didn't have any explanation of what sleep is and why we do it. And I thought, how comes that such an important aspect of our life is still completely unexplored?
Y'all, I had no idea how far behind we were in studying sleep. This field is kind of just getting started, and Giorgio is right. It's a totally unsolved puzzle for both humans and other animals.
Yeah, so sleep is one of the most extreme mystery of biology because it's really not just something that is about humans, but it's about all the animals. So the fact that we go in a state that is hard to explain, but at the same time is ubiquitous. So you have animals, for instance, like elephants that sleep for as little as 2 hours a day, normally. And animals like bats that are reported to be sleeping up to 20 hours a day. And so the idea that scientists have been looking for one universal function of sleep makes this very difficult to reconcile because you will have to come up with a function that requires 2 hours in an elephant, but 20 hours in a bat. And this is not normally how we interpret biology.
Daily sleep requirements for mammals are all over the place. Cows only need 4 hours, whereas rabbits and humans need about 8. Dogs need 11, cats need 12, and big cats, like tigers and lions, need more like 18 and 20 hours, respectively. But those are just our average sleep requirements. In different stages of our life, our bodies require a different amount of sleep to feel like our batteries have been fully recharged. So in humans, I pulled up some numbers and I'm curious if you agree with this because this was shocking to me. So newborns, we need about 14 to 17 hours. Infants are 12 to 16. Young children need about 10 to 14 hours. And then once you get to school age kids, like 6 to 12, they need 9 to 12 hours. So these elementary students could need up to 12 hours of sleep a day, which seems shocking to me. Teenagers, I knew this one, 8 to 10 hours. I know they sleep forever. And then adults, so 18 and older, are recommended 7 to 9 hours. How do you feel about those numbers? Do you agree with that?
Yes, we know that the amount of sleep that people get changes as they age. It's much higher when we are young, and it declines as we grow up. The quality of sleep might also change, but that's not necessarily direct. We don't have a full understanding of why this is it. We do see something like this also in animals. So there might be some aspects of it which relates to a possible developmental purpose of sleep. So the fact that children before adolescence, they need so much sleep might have to do with how their brain is still developing.
Of course, Giorgio also reminded me that we all don't wear the same size shoes, so why would we assume that we all need the same amount of sleep? If you feel like you need more sleep than recommended, you should probably just listen to your body. I'm curious, do you think that's been consistent forever since humans have been on Earth, that I'm not going to use the word need, but we get 7 to 9 hours? Or do you think that's something that's evolved as we've lifted ourselves out of the food chain?
Oh, no, I think that the sleep we're getting now is extremely different from the one that our ancestors were getting because our lifestyle is extremely different. So in terms of evolution, the sleep we are getting now, the life we're conducing now, is completely different from the one we've evolved to do. If nothing for the fact that we now live in a world that is powered by electricity, and so we have basically access to light whenever we want. And the other thing that really changes our sleep amount is food availability. So when all animals are starved, or in general, if they're looking for food, their sleep amount reduces massively. And so, a lion that is looking for food might go and walk for days without getting hardly, any sleep. And when he finally finds a prey and fills its belly, then he might go and sleep for days in a row and change completely his pattern.
Dad! Come on, Dad, we gotta go! Wake up! Dad!
Rebound sleep or recovery sleep is a slightly different phenomenon. It has to do with what we call sleep homeostasis, which is really a milestone in terms of defining sleep. And it's basically the fact that if we lose sleep, we generally, not always, and not all animals have to do it, but if we lose sleep, we need to recover it. It's been as at least interpreted as an indication that there is something that sleep does that somehow has to be done. Because if we skip it one night or 2 nights, then we have to recover it. The complication again here is that you never recover one-to-one the sleep you've lost, right? If you stay up all night, you are not going to sleep extra 12 hours on the day after. You usually sleep 1 hour or 2 hours more. And there's been experiments, especially in the past, where people have stayed awake for as long as 11, 12 days or more, and in a row without ever sleeping. And the amount of sleep they recover, again, is, in terms of hours, is not definitely not in terms of days. The same is true also in animals. When they lose sleep, they recover a bit of it, but definitely not a one-to-one. And sometimes they don't even have to recover it. There are ecological situations, for instance, when the animal is looking for food or when it's mating season, where they can completely forgo the lack of sleep.
So maybe there are some situations in which sleep isn't one of our essential needs, like food, water, and shelter. But we'll need to run a lot more experiments to figure that out.
A lot of sleep research goes into sleep medicine, which is understandable, but in a way ends up losing the big picture, I think.
How would you even define sleep then? If we are all experiencing it differently, what is the definition of sleep?
So the definition of sleep goes back in history to very ancient times. The first time that sleep was mentioned in literature was in the first book ever written, which is the Epic of Gilgamesh.
In this ancient story, the character Gilgamesh is challenged to stay awake for 6 days and 7 nights in a test to become immortal. And spoiler alert, the immortality thing does not work out. He falls asleep pretty much right after accepting the challenge.
So people were able to recognize and describe sleep long before we had scientific instruments to measure it. And generally, it is really the realization that animals have to enter a state of apparent vulnerability. So you kind of almost lose consciousness. Is the fact that animals need to basically cut themselves out from the environment and enter a state that is completely different. That's our starting point. Anything on top of that, it could be useful, but it could also be a red herring.
That's probably why there are so many different theories out there about what's going on with sleep from a physiological aspect. I ran across one that I was interested in. I want to run it by you. So they put sleep basically in 3 different categories. So the first one was energy, conservation, and storage. The second one is self-repair and recovery. And then the third one was brain maintenance. How do you feel about those categories? Do you like that? Do you think that covers everything?
So, yes. There's been lots of hypotheses of what sleep might be doing. One complication is that people have been looking for one to rule them all. So one hypothesis would explain sleep in fruit flies as much as it does in humans. And this obviously makes things very complicated. The other aspect, obviously, that is common in the field is to think that a major function of sleep has to do with the brain. This is because, as I said, when we sleep, we somehow lose consciousness to a certain extent. We go into a different world. The rationale is that if sleep had nothing to do with the brain, then we could sleep while we do other stuff. So we could sleep while we walk, or even just eat, or simply rest. And the other aspects that clearly indicates that sleep might be connected to some brain function is due to the fact that sleep deprivation impairs cognitive abilities.
We've all been there. When it's time to go to sleep, our bodies begin to feel tired and exhausted, like we're out of energy. And those who pull all-nighters will tell you that at a certain point, their brains start to get a little cloudy. But when you finally climb under the covers and close your eyes, your body begins to cycle through REM and non-REM sleep. You start with a non-REM sleep, which has 3 main stages. Step number 1 occurs right as your body transitions into being asleep. You're barely sleeping here and can be easily woken up. This lasts for a max of 10 minutes. Then you move into step number 2, the first real stage of sleep, when you're lightly sleeping. This is when your body temperature lowers and your breathing and heart rate are regulated. This section can last anywhere from about 25 minutes to an hour. At this point, you move into the third and final step of non-REM sleep. This is your deep sleep that lasts for about 20 to 40 minutes. Your brain is pretty active here, and that's one of the reasons why it's so hard to wake people up during this stage. It is considered to be the most restful part of the sleep cycle, so if you've got a newborn at home, do your best to shoot for 2 consecutive hours of sleep, which I know is easier said than done. Up next, REM sleep. REM earned its name, rapid eye movement, for a reason. During this stage, your eyes and eyelids twitch like crazy because your brain is having its nightly fiesta. Your body becomes temporarily paralyzed and your breathing increases as your brain goes wild with activity. So what is dreaming then? What is happening in our brain when we're dreaming?
Dreaming is a whole different chapter. Dreaming is really the quintessential experience of what it's like to be, conscious in a way, because it's such a personal experience. It's almost impossible to study scientifically.
Well, dreams, they feel real while we're in them, right? It's only when we wake up that we realize something was actually strange.
What we do know, there are several misconceptions about dreaming. So, for instance, one misconception is that you dream only during certain times of the night, while in fact you pretty much dream all the time. The difference is whether you remember those dreams or not. Generally, you remember the dreams that are closer to the time you wake up, so the morning dreams. But experiments were done a long time ago already, where you can just wake up a person in the middle of the night at different times, at 11, at 2, at 3, or 4, and you ask them immediately, were you dreaming? And they pretty much always say yes. So no matter when you wake up a person, they'll be dreaming. It's whether they remember the dream or not that makes all the difference. The other interesting aspect is that there are probably two types of dreams that we can have. There are dreams that actually make sense. So you dreams that follow the rule of physics, for instance, where they look resemble more like memories or things that could happen, and then dreams that could not make sense. So dreams where you fly and then suddenly you talk to a spoon, this kind of stuff. They seem to be different and coming at different times during the night.
And why is that? Well, listener, please don't hate me for this, but we're going to need to put a pin in dreaming for now and come back to this question next month, because I interviewed an expert on memory and he's got some very interesting thoughts on what's really happening when we dream. So make sure you subscribe to the pod because you don't want to miss his theories on the whole thing. So anywho, it's estimated that we cycle through REM and non-REM sleep about 4 to 5 times each night. As the night progresses, you spend less time in the third restorative stage of non-REM sleep and more time in REM sleep. When we wake up from a good night's sleep, in theory, we will feel fully rested and invigorated with energy. Now, experts believe that humans spend about 1/3 of their life sleeping, which is a fact that has always driven me crazy. I thought this would be the first thing I change if I gained superpowers, but Giorgio says there probably isn't much of an evolutionary benefit to evolve into a sleepless being.
Some people think that sleep is a waste of time in terms of evolution, right? One of the motto of the field, so even within the field, is that if sleep doesn't serve a critical function, then it's one of the biggest mistakes evolution has ever made. And this reveals a very skewed conception of what evolution does. Usually the example that I give to explain this is, let's try and think that we found a pill that removes sleep completely. And we give this pill to, say, our cat. So now our cat doesn't need to sleep anymore. So it goes from 16 hours of sleep a day to 0. What kind of evolutionary advantage will our cat get from being able to be awake for so long? Not much, really, because there is only a limited amount of time that animals can spend mating. They cannot just, even if they were awake 24/7, they would not be able to mate continuously. In fact, in most mammals, mating happens, very periodically, like once a month or even once every few months. So there is really no advantage in terms of spreading genes that comes from being awake all the time. And the same is true for humans, right? We think that sleep at the moment is a problem because it interferes with our productivity, with our hobbies. If we could completely get rid of sleep, then we could read books, write books, paint. We all like to think of ourselves like Leonardo da Vinci, who's, be extremely productive without sleep. But in fact, I think most people, if they could go without sleep, they will just end up spending hours just, probably watching football or something like that. All stuff that might be nice, but it's not going to have an impact on our evolutionary ability, to spread genes around. If anything, even less.
Okay, I get what he's saying. But is it physiologically possible? Would we die if we took that magical pill and never slept again? Hear Giorgio's thoughts after the break. Imagine a world where artists could paint for 24 hours a day, where archaeologists could dig for hours on end, where writers could type without falling asleep at their keyboards. Creators would thrive in this world, don't you think? But how long could our bodies keep up with this new lifestyle? A few days? Months? Years? So I guess the question is for humans, will we die if we don't sleep?
So in humans, there is no evidence that we die if we don't sleep, simply because it's not an experiment you could do. There is some literature that suggests this, but it comes from things like the Spanish Inquisition. So it's not quite the kind of things that you will consider a well-controlled experiment.
Giorgio says there have been a few notable but also kind of problematic sets of experiments done with animals to study this. Back in the 1890s, several scientists looked into sleep deprivation by keeping puppies awake in a variety of different appalling conditions. Ugh, this is really sad, so brace yourself. But they started dying after 9 days, and none of them made it past 17 days. This experiment, for obvious reasons, hasn't been replicated in more recent times. Nowadays, these studies are mostly performed on rats, and the results are pretty much the same. When forced to experience total sleep deprivation, some rats died after 11 days, and their friends never made it more than a month.
The problem with these experiments is that they are experiments that are completely stressful. These animals, especially when they are young, especially when they're the pups, and they have to do this with their mother present, they lose their fur because they scratch themselves. Their state of stress is unprecedented. And at least when the pups experiments were done, for instance, stress was not a thing yet. It was just not discovered. The definition of stress goes back to the 1950s. So it's just basically impossible to say whether this animal die out of lack of sleep or rather die out of excess of stress. And my bet is on the latter.
It wouldn't surprise me. Listeners of the pod know all about the negative health effects of stress thanks to our 15th episode. Feeling stressed? Here's what's actually happening. But Giorgio isn't guessing here. He's performed these sleep deprivation experiments, except he doesn't work on humans or puppies or rats. His subjects? Fruit flies.
So why fruit flies? So fruit flies are really a power horse of biology and genetics. There are so many things that we know about biology and genetics that came from fruit flies because they are by far the best understood animal when it comes to genetics. So yeah, they just, the perfect model.
As I'm sure you can tell by now, Giorgio is a really kind and compassionate scientist. So from the start, he wanted to ensure that his flies had a nice, pleasant environment. For his sleep deprivation experiments, he employs a gentle mechanical robot that reminds me of WALL-E.
So the robot basically will just will continuously look at whether the flies are asleep or not. As soon as they fall asleep, it will rotate the tube and the flies will wake up. And one thing we can do with this system is because there is no stress involved in this equation, we can keep the flies awake basically for as long as they live. They just die of natural death. Males absolutely have no effect in longevity when we use this system, and females they do pay a little price. So their life is it's a bit shorter, but shorter in a matter of a couple of days out of 2 months that they normally live. So it's not a big deal. So this was for us was the first evidence that if you can remove stress from the way you keep animals awake, there might be other consequences, of course, right? If you keep me awake and then you ask me to drive a car, that still probably be lethal. And if we do the same kind of equivalent experiment with flies, probably we'll find they pay a price to stay awake all this time. But in the lab, there is no a strong price to be paid.
What I'm hearing is that if there was a way to somehow remove all stress from our environment, there might be a possibility for us to survive without sleep, especially if we take a good, hard look at our biological priorities. For example, in one of Giorgio's studies, he put a bunch of female fruit flies in a tube with a bunch of male fruit flies and made sure no one got any sleep. Throughout the night, the males continuously courted the females until she agreed to mate once, and then she had to spend the rest of the evening shooing away all the other males. The following evening, the exhausted females needed rebound sleep in order to recover from their sleepless nights. But the flirty male flies were perfectly fine. They did not seem to need any extra sleep. So then, naturally, Giorgio wanted to know what would happen if he repeated the study using only male flies. Just like in the previous experiment, the males stayed up for the entire night, except this time due to aggression instead of sex drive. But then, the next night, all the male flies were fatigued and needed rebound sleep to recover from their previous all-nighter. The results of these studies hint at the possibility of some kind of biological hierarchy. Sex appears to be more important than sleep, but sleep is more important than fighting. Makes sense to me. So tell me, what does a fruit fly look like when it's sleeping? Can you really tell if it's sleeping or if it's just like frozen? I mean, how do you know?
Going back to what we were saying before, the best marker for sleep is really a change in behavior, and particularly a change in arousal. We actually published a paper 3 years ago where we show that not only does arousal threshold change in flies as they sleep, but also their ability to recognize stimuli is similar to what humans do. There are studies done in the 1960s in humans that show that even during sleep, we are able to process information around us. So we're not just able to hear noises, but we're actually able to decode those noises. We are able to interpret whether a name being called is our name and react to it, or not our name, and then keep on sleeping. We can define basically even the tone of voice or who is speaking to us just during sleep. And then our brain can decide to wake up or not, depending on the stimulus. And we show that flies can do the same. They can react to some odors which are relevant to them, but completely ignore other odors which are irrelevant, even though they are much, much stronger in their intensity. So their brain works pretty much like ours. Yes, the arousal threshold changes, but it changes also in terms of what kind of stimuli they are receiving.
Another thing we have in common is our circadian clocks. We first learned about fruit fly circadian rhythms back in 1935, and then 20 years later, we figured out that these rhythms were driven by a biological clock. In the 1980s, 3 scientists, Jeffrey Hall, Michael Rosbash, and Michael Young, figured out which specific genes were contributing to the fruit fly's inner clock and creating its biological rhythms. This information led to a huge breakthrough in understanding of the molecular mechanisms within our human bodies, particularly the ones that contribute to things like appetite, digestion, and sleep patterns. Their research was so important that Hall, Rosbash, and Young were awarded the Nobel Prize in Physiology or Medicine in 2017.
Circadian rhythm is a special feature of life, I would say, because it relates to the one thing that has basically never changed since life existed on this planet. So obviously there are people who have different clocks, and also obviously it requires some level of adaptability, for instance, between seasons. But in general, we have evolved in a planet that rotates in 24 hours, and this has never changed. This phenomenon should take a central role when we discuss sleep, especially now that a lot of literature is emerging about the fact that what matters even more than how long we sleep is really how synchronous our sleep regime is.
And that issue can quickly become problematic for humans who experience sleepwalking, sleep talking, nightmares, bedwetting, confusional arousals, sleep-related groaning, or sleep-related hallucinations, all of which are collectively referred to as parasomnias.
I'm so tired.
Everyone gets insomnia now and then.
Stevie, I haven't slept in a year.
Insomnia is something that it can happen to any of us. At some point in life, probably everyone has experienced some level of insomnia. And when this happens, it's normally associated to stress. So you have a situation at work, things are not going well, and you go through periods, it could be months, it could be sometimes years, where you have insomnia or you have disturbed sleep. But if things get a bit more pathological, like sleep apnea or sleepwalking, this kind of conditions, then obviously it's a different situation, and those are more common than we think, especially sleep apnea, because the main reason for sleep apnea is still obesity, and so because obesity in Western society is so diffuse, this is becoming very, very common.
Sleep apnea happens when someone stops breathing for short periods of time when sleeping. And it can be caused by the physical weight of the body pushing down on the trachea and constricting the airway, or by your brain forgetting to send signals to the muscles that control your breathing. Continuous positive airway pressure machines, commonly called CPAP machines, are lifesavers because they provide a continuous supply of oxygen to encourage the airways to stay open. I know they aren't the cutest things to wear to bed, but if the alternative is not waking up in the morning, it doesn't seem like that bad of an option. Another common and terrifying sleep disorder is sleep paralysis, which, I'll be honest, I wasn't sure if it was a real condition.
Oh, yes, it's definitely real. So there's some moments during sleep where we completely lose control of our muscles. In most people, this is just a phenomenon that happens and then vanishes. Is a normal, absolutely normal aspect of sleep. But in some people, things go a bit wrong. And this thing can happen, for instance, during the day. So they suddenly lose completely control of the muscles and they basically fall on the ground as if they were asleep, but they are still awake inside. It's just that they cannot communicate it because they have lost control to their muscles. So this is rather a common condition. And some other people, the opposite happens, where they, during sleep, they kind of wake up, but again, they could not control the muscle. So it can happen during wakefulness and it can also happen during sleep. When it does happen during sleep, it's called sleep paralysis.
And Giorgio believes sleep paralysis may be to blame for the common myth that aliens abduct us at night.
Now, after the blue light pulled you into the spacecraft, what is your next memory?
I came to and saw a beautiful being made of like a beautiful calming light.
Think about it. You're laying in bed, awake, but you can't move.
And because they are technically still asleep, dreams can still, be part of this vision. And so reality is not really clear at that point. And so you basically have to mix this condition. It's especially the first time, it's such a frightening condition that really, really marks you. And people come up with this because of sleep paralysis.
Tom Holland, aka Spider-Man, reportedly suffers from sleep paralysis. However, instead of aliens chasing him, it's paparazzi. Okay, friends, remember how last year I encouraged you to send us your sleep questions? Apparently, this is a very popular topic because we received a ton of great questions to throw at Giorgio, like this one.
Hi, Kate, this is Michael. I'm just wondering why people sleep in different positions and how that impacts our sleep.
Well, it comes to the variability of biology, but it could be, pain, it could be body size, it could be stomach problems. So there is not really any mysterious reason. It's just variability linked to these factors.
Comfort, something like that, yeah.
Comfort, yes, yeah.
Hi, Kate. This is Jeanette, and I've struggled with sleep for years. I've made some changes and I'm doing better. However, I still take an over-the-counter sleep aid most nights, and I wanted to know if there are health consequences for doing this.
Oh, yes, definitely. This is something that, it should be discussed with a doctor because one could get resistance to it. It could mask possible sleep issues emerging in the future. In general, it's an indication that, something could be fixed in other ways.
This next one is from Brooke.
Hey, Kate, I'm wondering about my Fitbit data. It shows that I am often very low in the deep sleep phase of sleeping. And I want to know, firstly, is that reliable data from a Fitbit? And secondly, what can I do to reach that deep phase?
They're generally very reliable when compared to the state of the art, which is polysomnography. There is a problem with these things like the Fitbit, the Apple Watch, is that they create a new phenomenon in the field we call orthosomnia, which is basically the belief that your sleep is never going to be enough. Basically, you feel judged by your phone who's scolding you because you didn't have enough sleep last night. And this creates a level of anxiety that actually makes sleep worse. Because people feel like, oh my God, it's a bit like, the Strava equivalent of sleep. Like my friend got 8 hours and I only got 7. So now I'm going to have all these kind of problems. So I would say, take them with a grain of salt. They can be fun, but don't rely too much on it. And definitely do not stress if you're getting too little sleep.
I love that answer. Okay, Tina wants to know.
Why is it you can sleep for that recommended 8 hours and still wake up feeling tired? Are good sleep and a sense of rejuvenation two different things?
Well, it could be with the timing of sleep, as we said before. So it's important to actually nail down your timing so that you always go to bed at the same time and you always wake up at the same time. If you don't do this, you might as well sleep, 10 hours or more and still feel groggy the day after because your circadian clock is basically misaligned and you're jet lagged. Or it could be something to do about the sleep condition, light, noise.
Okay, so Melody wants to know, and you kind of touched on this earlier.
Hi, Kate. I have a question about hormones. I'm 51, perimenopausal, and on hormone replacement therapy. It really helps, but then sometimes insomnia is just there. How much of losing sleep is normal, and why would my body be doing this as part of my transition? I mean, butterflies get to sleep in a cocoon, but I get woke up at night. Why?
So sleep is really, I think we should come to terms with the fact that sleep is conditioned, but in general by our own biology. So for instance, how much food we ate, how much alcohol we had. It is also clearly, driven by our hormones, by our mood changes. And those things, a lot of those things change during menopause. So it's kind of normal that sleep will be affected. Sometimes even just having like hormonal control can really help with this, or having better sleep hygiene.
And this is from an anonymous listener. When we're trying to fall asleep, why do our brains bring up every embarrassing moment of our lives? Is there something happening in the brain that's causing that to happen?
Some of us are, overthinkers, as we said. So even during sleep, the brain doesn't stop, as we know, because we dream and we dream all the time. And so sometimes the quiet that we experience at the moment when we fall asleep is actually what makes the difference, because the contrast to the rest of the day disappears. So it could be a sign of a bit of anxiety and stress. So having maybe some meditative time before sleep, even just some quiet, a cup of tea, like herbal tea, really could help for this.
Now I have 5 just fun would you rather questions, and these are just silly and off the wall, so just go with it. So would you rather sleep in an igloo or in Death Valley where it can get really hot?
Oh, in an igloo.
In an igloo, okay. How about on a waterbed or on the floor?
On the floor, I think, personally.
Okay. Side sleeper or on your back? Or stomach, I guess.
Side sleeper.
Same. Yes.
Spooning.
Okay, these last 2 are really wacky. Would you rather stay awake for 48 hours straight or be forced to sleep in one of those blow-up dinosaur costumes every night for a week?
No, I'd definitely rather stay awake for 48 hours straight. I think these questions are interesting because, I think we all accept that we all have our preferences when it comes to sleep position, sleep time, a mattress. So that's a very well accepted fact. But somehow we expect that everyone should sleep the same amount of time. So it doesn't make sense.
That's a good point. Why do we do that to ourselves? Okay, I've got one more, and this is like the weirdest one. Would you rather sleep with 3 Great Danes or 3 ferrets?
Well, I guess 3 ferrets.
No way. I bet my husband, I was like, he's going to pick the dogs. No one would pick the ferrets. Okay, I lost.
I mean, the dogs will probably wake me up all the time because they move, and the ferrets just stay in a corner, I suppose.
Well, I just want to thank you so much for jumping on and talking to me about this. I've learned so much, so I really appreciate it. I enjoyed learning everything that you research and then having this conversation with you.
It was a pleasure.
3 ferrets, huh? I don't even want to think about what that bedroom would smell like. All right, friends, that's it for now. But before I let you go, I thought I'd share a few of Giorgio's recommendations for good sleep hygiene. Number 1. Wind down before you go to bed. Playing a fast-paced video game or watching an emotional and stressful movie or sports game can be detrimental for sleep quality. Number 2, remove all lights and noises from the bedroom. This means no nightlight, no television, no sound machines. Get them out of there. Finally, number 3, you want quality, not quantity. Fewer uninterrupted hours of sleep in an appropriate environment is better for you than more sleep in a bright, loud environment with a pet. Animals can disrupt your sleep, so think twice about training a puppy or a kitten to cuddle up at night. And remember, every human is going to have different sleep needs, so listen to your body, develop a routine, and then stick with it. Like the Irish proverb goes, a good laugh and a long sleep are the best cures in the doctor's book.